Appreciate him reading that for us. It's an important text. Did you notice, Pat, that had an accent when he was reading? Was it? Okay, I just want to make sure you got that, because I don't have one, so I had to have something. I was told the other day, what you need is an accent. You need an accent. Okay. But I appreciate it, Peter. Thank you. That story is a little ominous. But I don't think we grab hold of how ominous it really is. It's too familiar to us. It's a story we learned in Sunday school. It's a story we've heard over and over. In fact, we often just kind of maybe refer to it as the crossing of the River Jordan. And it is a powerful story. And it is an important story in Joshua. It's 21 times in chapters 3 and 4 alone, the crossing of the Jordan is mentioned. The Jordan River is mentioned 70 times in the book of Joshua. There's something about this moment that shapes the people of Israel. Something about standing on the banks of the Jordan River and looking across that body of water into a land that God has promised them intimidates them. Now, if you go to the Jordan River today, it's not all that intimidating. The Jordan River today is very low in most places. It's not running very fast in a lot of places. In fact, the water table is much lower than it was in ancient Israel. And that's one of the reasons is the state of Israel and the state of Jordan are using it to irrigate their crops and drinking water. And the Dead Sea is dying, really dying. It's losing its water. So when we stand on the banks of the Jordan today, it's not all that intimidating. Looks like an easy cross to us, unless, of course, you're not at a crossing border, then it's going to be a real problem, right? But Israel, for some reason, spent 3 days encamped along the river. I think they were intimidated. There's something about that river in the ancient world that creates a lot of fear. We know a lot of stories about the Jordan in the ancient world. For example, we know a story that a Greek general is chasing Jonathan of the Maccabees. And Jonathan swims across the river. He gets some floats and he gets across the river. But the Greek general decides, we're not going to do that. That's too dangerous. On another occasion, in the time of the Romans, the Pereans are backed up against the river and they have the choice, do we swim across or do we fight the Romans? They thought it was a better idea to fight the Romans because the river itself was intimidating. We have Christian travel logs from the ancient world that tell Christian pilgrims, be careful when you go into the water. Pilgrims like to get baptized in the Jordan for some reason, right? Well, the danger is that you're going to drown. You're going to get caught up in a current and you're going to drown. And Christian pilgrims did drown. Not the baptism they had in mind, right? We know from a 13th century document that the Jordan was still this intimidating river that people feared to cross. What is it about that? Well, we know at the flood stage in the ancient world, the Jordan River could get really deep. And it could get very wide. In fact, some estimate that maybe this was 10 to 12 feet deep. Maybe it was 140 foot wide at this point. It looked impassable. And one of the things that an ancient Assyrian general or Babylonian general would be most proud of, even in the annals of the Roman story, they would be most proud of the ability to cross a river. They would actually tell you how many rivers they crossed. Now, in addition to how many people they killed and how many cities they took, they would tell you how many rivers they crossed. Rivers form a barrier that create fear. But that's not the only thing that's going on here. Standing at the bank of that river is also the fear of the forces that rule that river. In the 1920s, archaeologists discovered a little place called Ugarit up in northern Syria on the coast. And in Ugarit, they discovered a whole wealth of archaeological resources, an archive, a whole archive of sources. And one of the things they found there is what is now called the Epic of Baal. And in the Epic of Baal, it's the story about how Baal became, and catch this language, how Baal became the Lord of all the earth. I hope that sounds familiar, because we just read it twice in the text in Joshua chapter 3. Baal is the Lord of all. Now, how did he become Lord of all the earth? Well, he defeated the sea and he defeated the river. And he became the God of all the earth. He became the God of the land of Canaan. He became the God who brings the rain, who makes the land fertile, who gives rise to the crops. He's the storm God who makes the rivers rise. And when the river rises, the gods are angry. And when the river rises, the gods are in control. And they're displaying their power. And Israel comes up to the river Jordan at flood stage. And the God of Canaan, the Lord of all the earth, says, "You're not crossing." And Joshua says, "Take the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth, and step into the water." And we see that the threat that Israel is intimidated by is not just the chaos of the waters, but it's by the powers that reign in those waters. And God calls Israel to make a step of faith, to trust that God, the Lord of Israel, is the Lord of all the earth. To step into the water and cross and receive the inheritance that God has determined to give to Israel. That this is God's gift to Israel. This is God's inheritance for Israel. That they are to become a people in this land, in a renewed Garden of Eden, a new beginning to the world. The world began in Genesis 1. It began again in Genesis 9. It begins again in Joshua 3 and 4. When Israel enters the land that is to be the new Eden, the new reign of God in the world, and the place where the reign of God would become so obvious and so attractive and so transformative that all the nations of the earth would flow to Jerusalem and flow to Israel to worship the real Lord of the earth. And we all know it didn't work out quite that way. But that's what standing at that river is about. The willingness to step into that future and trust that God reigns in the world. Not Baal, not the waters, not the chaos, but that God reigns in the world. That river's important for our story too, because we know another story, don't we? We know a story of Jesus who comes to that same river, maybe even in generally the same location. And Jesus comes to that river, and as he looks at the river, sometimes we have this kind of feeling, oh, that was an easy thing for Jesus. Just be baptized? Oh, sure, no problem. Where's the water? I don't think that that's exactly how it went down. Because as Jesus comes up to that water, there's a shadow of the cross that lies over that water. To step into that water is not to step into, a nice warm bath. To step into that water is to step toward the cross. It is to embrace the ministry the goal, the agenda of the kingdom of God. It is to embrace death, suffering for the sake of the world. Jesus at that water is looking at a cross. And we follow Jesus into that water, don't we? And here's where, maybe we need to really think about the nature of our act of discipleship when we're baptized. Now, I'm all for birthday parties and celebrate baptisms. This is a birthday. I'm all for that. But I think we have to remember that this is also like entering the military. That there's danger that lurks ahead. There's suffering that lurks ahead. There is struggle that lurks ahead. That entering into the water of baptism is not entering into the water of some kind of just, now we're in a rose garden. Entering into the waters of baptism is to follow Jesus to a cross. And we must count the cost of the cross. But there's another sense in which we stand at those waters. See, Israel stood at the waters to enter into a new inheritance. A renewed Garden of Eden. Joel chapter 2, verse 3 refers to Israel as this Garden of Eden. It was supposed to be a Garden of Eden. It was supposed to be God's new creation, God's new beginning in the world. And as we stand at Jordan ourselves, we look at our inheritance. You see, as we cross the Jordan through our baptism, we enter into that new world. The new world of the reign of God, and the reign of God that calls us to discipleship and calls us to sacrifice and calls us to look at the world with different set of eyes than what we have been trained by the advertisements on television to look at it with. We've been called to embrace the reality of the kingdom of God in the world and to join the mission, to participate in the mission of the kingdom of God, to remake this world through the power of God, to make it a different place, a new place, to be the beginning of new creation in our lives and in our churches and in our homes and in our workplaces, to be a place that testifies to the future that is already present among us. But it is also a sense in which we stand at the river, where we look across to see the fullness of that inheritance that lies in front of us. As Peter says in 2 Peter 3, we look forward. We anxiously await. Boy, we crave the new heavens and the new earth, the dwelling place of the righteous. We see a world all around us filled with death and anxiety and violence and hurt and discrimination and tragedy. And we look across the river and we see an inheritance. We stand on Jordan's stormy banks, right? And we cast a wishful eye to go to Canaan land, right? Where all our possessions lie. We are people who have stepped into the water with Israel, stepped into the water with Jesus, embraced the newness of the kingdom of God, taken on the mission that God has given us, to pursue it and to bring newness to the world by the power of God, in the hope, in the expectation that one day, as we face death, we'll cross Jordan's stormy banks. That's intimidating. Death has a power. But it's been a power, it's now a power that has lost its force. Because on the other side of the Jordan is one who has already crossed, waiting for us and bidding us to come and to enjoy the inheritance that he has given to us. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand, and I cast a wishful eye.